And so it is. Welcome to URLs and Query Params. I will be your host, Kyle Coverly. So, this was probably one of the things you missed on the code challenge, my guess. So by the end of this lesson, I hope that each and every one of you will be able to identify the parts of a URL and retrieve query params from a URL with JavaScript. We're going to try something new. Staff talked about this yesterday in our teacher training, and I kind of like this. I want you, in whatever note-taking tool that you have, can be digital, can be analog, I don't care. I want you to write these two things down and keep them somewhere where you can see them pretty readily. I'll give you a sec. All right, so let's tackle this first one. Identify the parts of a URL. So, URL looks like this. Let's see, it would be 443. All right, so we'll take that as an example. Oh, one more thing. All right, so here's a URL. Let's talk about the different parts of it, because there are a ton of them. Actually, I want you to think to yourself first. All the different parts of this URL, think to yourself about which ones you can name. Can I get a volunteer to hit me with anything that you can name in this URL?
I can name the query.
Query params, there we go. So that's called the query string. And then each of these are query parameters. Cool. What else do you notice in this URL?
You got your protocol, server, and your path.
Okay, so we'll call this the protocol. It's also sometimes called the scheme. So this could be HTTP, it could be HTTPS, it could be FTP, it could be SMTP, some protocol that you want your browser to use when it's sending this message. It's the protocol. Cool. And then I heard another one in there too.
Server and your path.
Ooh, so be real careful with server. I hear path. Path is good. That's the path. What else?
Or I guess the middle part's the host.
There are 4 things left. Break it down real small. How about this 443? Can anybody identify that?
Is that like when we do that localhost 3000?
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. So what is it when we do localhost?
It's just our browser.
Our port.
Port up.
So on whatever computer we get to, this is the part of the computer we want to send it to. It's like, it's supposed to be like a shipping analogy. You've got, you're shipping it to this country or whatever, and you're specifically sending it to this port. One country can have a whole bunch of ports. Cool. 3 more to go.
I mean, Google's the website.
Ooh, website. We got to get more specific than website.
Website name.
I'll give you a hint. All 3 of them use the word domain.
So domain name?
Okay, so I'm going to call Google the domain name. Really, it's google.com, but it's okay. Okay. What about that www?
Subdomain?
Correct. And then the .com. What's that?
Top level.
Correct. Top level domain. These are all the parts of a URL. So google.com, that's the full domain. Made up of the domain and the top level domain. That is an alias for an IP address somewhere. So google.com equals 175.13.6.123. It's just Pig Latin. They mean the same thing. The port is once we find that computer, that's where on the computer is listening for whatever message I'm about to send. The format of the message is determined by the protocol. And I can also say, hey, computer, I don't know if you break up your website into like different chunks, but I want this subdomain. So that could be www, that could be mail, that could be users, that could be whatever. The benefit of having subdomains is that there are certain things between sites that aren't saved if they're on different subdomains. So like, for example, if you didn't want usernames to passwords and stuff to cache, cookies can't be reused across subdomains. There's a couple rules for your browser on that. And so you can intentionally take advantage of those by putting stuff on different subdomains. All right, so I've gotten to the right computer. I know what format I'm sending the messages in. I know what part of the computer I'm sending the message to. I'm specifying a subdomain if there is one. So once all that's happened, then that path This is getting down into like the application at this point. So this could either be a specific file that I'm asking for, like it could be /mail.html, or it could be going to a router like it is in Rails and saying, I don't know, Rails, route this HTTPS request to whatever the fuck part of your application you have /mail mapped to. And then that query string is one of a couple different ways we can send data with a request. We can send it in the body, we can send it in the headers, and we can send it in the URL. The advantage of putting something in the URL is it's bookmarkable. You can send it to somebody else and they go to the exact same place. You can't do that with headers or a body or something. And those are all the different parts of a URL. Ask me some questions.
So really only domain and to the right are strictly speaking necessary to get me there? Do I have that right?
They're all needed. Well, if there's not something doesn't have to have a subdomain.
I mean, because I've certainly typed things in from the right over, or, you know, just had that link ready.
And then your browser filled the rest out.
Intuits the rest, I guess, yeah.
Correct. Other questions about this?
I guess like with the query params, is there a limit to how many you can pass in there?
You're limited. There's a technical limit to the length of a URL. I never remember what it is. Let's hang on. So length limit URL. There you go. A URL can't be longer than that. What else?
So when we want to make like a website go public, is that where we go into like using like a hosting website? And I was just wondering for the backend, I guess I heard it from like the other mod. Is that where Heroku comes in? Is like you put your backend stuff in the Heroku?
Ah, very nice.
That where you link that, communicate it, so it's like servers like always live.
Great question. Let's go back to this diagram. All right, so browser asks for a file, gets the file back, starts going through the file. File tells it to make API requests. Data comes back. We do things with the data. So this is often handled by tools like Firebase or Netlify or ZiteNow or Surge. They just take files and hold on to them for you. It's like Google Drive. There's no programs installed on them. It's just holding on to files. Contrast, this needs to, for example, have Rails installed and like have a way to process requests and has RAM and like that kind of stuff. So for that, we want like a fake computer. Heroku is good for that, as is see, Elastic Beanstalk. That's the equivalent on Amazon Web Services. Let's see, who else has a good one? These types of tools generically are called platform as a service, and they're fucking cool. So check this out. I'll show you. So here's like the Develop Denver Heroku server. So if I want to, scale this server up so it can handle more requests at once, I just go like that. It's so cool. It is so ridiculously cool. That was like an entire division of a company like 10 years ago. And then it just tells you how much it costs. All right, it's $2,500 a month, and you can handle 100 requests at the same time. That's so cool. Like I can attach databases to it and like lots of other cool things. It is currently has Node installed. It runs npm start whenever like I push up new code to it. Magical. Firebase, on the other hand, so the Develop Denver file server, kind of like Google Drive. I'm currently using, or this is the transfer, it's 192 megabytes. I think it says how much I'm storing somewhere. Oops, hosting. So I've got some URLs mapped to this stuff. There we go. So I'm currently using 1.3 gigabytes of the storage. Half a gig of stuff has been downloaded this month. Yeah, so there's file server and API server. As you might imagine, the cost structure is wildly different between these. This is dirt cheap. This is very expensive. So it's one of the reasons that we don't just use the same thing for both of them. Because ultimately, these are just computers. And this is the like all-in-wonder hosted concierge, like white glove treatment. You can also just take 2 Raspberry Pis and like hook them up yourself and like do this shit. That also works. One more thing I want to show you. I told you that those like a URL is just a map to an IP address, just one for one. Oh, come on. Shit, I just changed this. All right, I want to do that on the video. So on AWS, developdenver.org is registered with AWS's service Route 53. And it says, by the way, if anybody comes a knocking and asks what the IP address for developdenver.org is, it should go here. And it redirects over to this Firebase thing. Specifically this. But these two guys handshake and agree that this is where that domain should redirect to. Pretty cool. All right, back to our objective. More questions about how URLs work.
What was the TLD?
Top level domain. So these are just broad categories. So Google has google.com. They probably also have google.net and google.org. But like, you don't have to. Like, I own kylecorbally.com. I don't own kylecorbally.fun, or because you have to pay for each of those. They're not a lot, but they're not free either. And they especially recently have been releasing a fuck ton of new top level domains. So like, you might remember like a couple of years ago, all these like cutesy startup names that ended with ly. That's because like ly used to be Libya's country code, and something happened a few years ago, and that got a whole lot looser. And so you could just make your own .ly. And since that was a totally new top level domain, it was a gold rush to who could get really short domains in the ly TLD. And so then you end up with like all kinds of cutesy startup names to like take advantage of that. I had a company called RepIQ once. I tried to get rep.iq, but IQ is Iraq, and that has not loosened up. So there's a company called ICANN that is in charge of like who's allowed to register which thing fucking where. For example, .org, that you used to have to be a nonprofit to have a .org URL. That restriction ended last year, I think. Not anybody can do it. I just bought one last month. But like edu is still restricted. You have to either be a nonprofit or you need to be like a degree granting institution, or like there's different rules and shit for it. But there's an organization that like administers all of that. But yeah, like they've started releasing like .party and like all kinds of like wild ones. TLD list. So yeah, here's all the TLDs. .travel. .org, .net, .museum, .mobi, .jobs. Other questions about URLs? .africa, .beer. And like, these are the companies that Johnson & Johnson owns .baby, nice. This is who you have to, like if you want a .beauty domain, you have to buy it from L'Oreal. And they usually end up being about $8 each. But the problem is like, wow, that's not that much. And it's not. And so you end up buying a fuck ton of them. And then you end up paying like $150 a year to keep renewing all these domains that you're just collecting like pogs. There used to be a way bigger issue with domain squatting, which is people buying things with the hope to resell it to somebody who wants it. It's like real estate, basically. And there's some legislation, I want to say like 15 years ago, that made that just not all that feasible a thing. Basically, if somebody else bought kylecorbally.com and then but wasn't doing anything with it, and then I wanted to use it because that's my name, like they would have to sell it to me for a pretty low price. And so it like didn't all the way kill domain squatting, but it put a bullet in its head for sure. What else? Cool. I'm going to give you another URL, and I want you to tell me all the pieces of it. Actually, okay, so this URL here, I would like you to Slack me all of the different parts of this URL. Go. All right, Slack me what you got. Cool. So what I'm seeing is that people are identifying this pretty well, except for the path. The path in this is that. It's everything before the query string, but after the port. So like if the thing at mail.yahoo.org is a Rails app or something, it's going to try to look for a route that's /today/top. All that stuff is part of the path. And it's supposed to be directly analogous to like your file system. So for example, if I go to some folder on here, and perfect. So I have this file, init.vim. It's inside this .files folder. If I run light server inside of this, and shoot, I already forgot what the structure of this is. It's in .files, cool. Okay, so if I run a light server in here, and I do /.files/init.vim, I get that file. It's like navigating through the file system to try to get to that. If you don't put anything, it assumes you're asking for a file called index.html. I don't have one in here, so it 404. Ask me more questions about this.
What was it that you started with for the protocol and then changed it?
FTP, file transfer protocol, which is, so HTTPS is like a round trip thing where you send a message that's formatted this way and you get a message that's formatted this way back. FTP is like that, but it's not for like reading contents of files. It's for moving files around. So it's like downloading a file on another computer or uploading a file to another computer. So there's a similar protocol for all of that. And for example, like HTTP stuff is supposed to be relatively small. So if for whatever reason your internet connection shits out halfway through, it goes, fuck it, I'll just try it again. That would be real damn obnoxious if you're downloading a really big file and then halfway through you missed a single packet, and rather than retrying the packet, it goes, nah, I'll just start the entire download all over again. Wah, 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 wah. So anybody who was around in like the late 90s and ever tried to use like liveconcerts.com or like a real player sort of thing, and like your internet hiccuped and it just restarted the entire thing over again, there you go. And I changed it because I couldn't remember the port for FTP. 80 is the default port for HTTP traffic. 443 is the default port for HTTPS traffic. 22 is the default port for SSH traffic. And the FTP one's really low, but I can't remember what it is. Default port. They are arbitrary. 21, there you go. They are arbitrary. Like there's no magic to any of the port numbers, but there are widely accepted defaults for them. So when I type in google.com with HTTPS, it assumes I'm making that on port 443. I don't need to tell it. Here, I can prove it. So there's the URL. And if I look in my network tab at that request, scheme, HTTPS, host, google.com. Hey, look where it made the actual request. Port 443 of this IP address. It turned google.com into that IP address. You can even just use the IP address. Check this out. If I take that, pop that in here, ta-da! also goes to Google because they're the exact same thing. Google.com is a hell of a lot easier to remember than 172.217.11.228 though. One last mind blower. Map of the internet. That's what the internet looks like. Every little teeny tiny dot on there is an IP address. Like that.
Good God, we are in a simulation. Oh my God.
There you go. Pretty cool, huh?
It really is a series of tubes.
Yes, it is. Cool. Anything else on URLs? All right. Hopefully we feel like we can identify the parts of a URL. Now we need to retrieve query params from a URL with JavaScript. Let's say I'm using one of these so-called query parameters. How would I access that query parameter with JavaScript? Well, it's time to find out. Okay, don't follow along with this part. I'll give you the code. All this, all the single bagels, all the single bagels, all the single bagels, all the single bagels. If you want it, then you should have put cream cheese on it. All right, so I've got these 3 empty files here. I'm gonna go over this index HTML. I'm gonna scaffold out an HTML page like I've done so many times before. Meta char set UTF-8. Okay, so, oh gosh. Sound of a 4-year-old screaming really just hits you in the fillings. Let's see, I'll do div. All right, so goal for this is going to be to get a single bagel to show up on the page from the Bagel API. So if I go to this, all right, bagels 5577 should give me back a single bagel. Like so. Neat, it does. So what I want to do now, do it this way. I want to be able to make that dynamic. So it's not just 557. I can also get back 5578 and 5579. Etc. So I want to be able to read that out of a query param. Make this a Git repo. I'm going to put it up on GitHub, and you are going to fork and clone it down. All right, there's our app. I'm throwing this in chat. Fork and clone, por favor. All right, I'm back. So what I'd like you to do now go into this app.js file, and what I want you to do is, we're just gonna hard code it. I want you to try to fetch the bagel at this URL. Then I want you to make its name show up on the page in this little bagel area. So if I get this bagel, we take its type, I guess. Make its type show up in there. Fetch, make a DOM element, add it there. Go. When you're done, please Slack me the contents of your app.js file.
We're just trying to make the bagels show up like in our web page, correct?
Yep. So yeah, if you can get the data at this URL, make that type show up on your page. You don't, oh, and you don't need to do this with query params or anything like that. Just hard code it for right now. We'll do the query params piece next. Another 30 seconds. All right, Slack me what you got, even if it's not working. I just want to see. All right, let's take a look at it. Lots of people pretty darn close on this one. So if I do a fetch, to this, take the response, I parse the JSON that I get back. Remember, I'm not turning it into JSON. I got JSON, and I want it to be a JavaScript object. And then the thing that comes back, I saw a bunch of people not clear on this one. Take a look at this URL. Take a look at the response. It's not a list of bagels, one bagel. That's a list of bagels. That's an array. We would iterate through that one if we wanted to add each one of these to the page. Not this one, though. Nothing to iterate over. We only got one. So I take the bagel that I get back, and I want to add that to the page. So I could do something like that'll give me that one. All right, so I have a reference to that. I want to put a p tag inside of it. So I'm going to create an element. And then I'm going to set its text content to bagel.type. And then I'm going to add it to the page. Something like that. I wonder if it works. You're beautiful. There it is. All right, so logic on this works. I saw some of you break that into a separate function. That's beautiful. So add bagel to page, and it takes in a bagel. And then we can take this, all this logic and throw it in there. And then we can do something like, now if that's all we're gonna do though, then we could just do that, right? And if that's all we're gonna do, anytime you see this pattern, we have a parameter and then you just immediately pass that as an argument into another function. Just do that, it's the exact same thing. Cool, does it still work? There it is. Coming in live from the API. All right, so I'm going to paste this code into chat. You can update it if you'd like.
Would you say that it is best practice to turn that into a function like that?
Yeah, like, so I usually write it as an arrow function with everything in line originally, and then refactor it to this. Because doing it all in line, I don't have to break my train of thought and figure out what all the little pieces are going to be. And so I can just kind of go, 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 go. And then once it works, then I want to refactor those functions out. Okay, this code is in chat if you'd like to borrow it. Now, what we want to do is turn that 5577. We want to be able to yank that out of a query parameter. So we want to be able to do something like go to localhost 3000 query param bagel equals 5577, and then get the 5577 out of that. Here's how this works. Turn off my notifications. Here's how this works. We're going to make something called URL search params. We'll say search params equals new URL search params. And then we're going to pass in window.location.search. So URL search params is built into the browser. We don't need to import that or anything. We just get it for free. Window.location.search, that's our query string. So this is breaking the query string into parameters for us. This is the query string. These are query params. That's how we get those out. Now, if I want to get the bagel or whatever, I do search params dot get, and then whatever the query parameter is. So if it's this, bagel is now 5577, if that's the URL that I put in. Cool. So now all I have to do, I'm going to make that a template string. Do something like that. Say, make it a little bit more clear. It's a bagel ID. Neat. I wonder if it still works. 5577. What's it mad at me about? Ooh. So if I look at this, this request over here that's currently failing out, like something I did. Let's see what I did wrong. So if I'm troubleshooting this, I want to see, it didn't get the bagel ID. So what I want to do now is log search params, and we'll log bagel ID. Let's see what I'm getting back.
Is that because you're missing the ID in your?
Oh, look, these URL search params. Let's see. We'll look up the syntax for this. MDN query params. Okay. Let's make sure that it was getting the query params back right. Oops. So I also want to see window.location.search. Empty string, sacre bleu. That's why. Oh, yeah. So bagel is 5577. All right, cool. There we go. Hey, and it worked. I don't know what it was, but there you go. Thought I did that right. So now the advantage is if I change this, I get all the other bagels. One HTML page, any bagel. So that also means that I can link to these. So if I had doing that normal thing where we're taking an array of things and we're listing them all out on there, now I can make an anchor tag that links to that ID and get that page, even though I only have one HTML page for it. JavaScript's doing all the dynamic stuff. That is how we do that. Just these 2 lines of code. That's it. Make new search params, get the query param we want. Done. Ask me some questions about this.
What's the significance of what's inside the parentheses search params.get bagel? Like, could you just name that anything, or
Yep.
what is it exactly?
Totally. Done.
Yeah, but I mean like the bagel.
Oh, that's what the key is in the URL.
Okay.
So if I wanted that to be B, then it's that.
Okay. And then you would have to type B to get to that page.
Yeah. Or like have that in your anchor tag. So like, what if over in this, I had something that was like a href and I send that to localhost 3000 bagel 5578. Now, no matter what page I'm on, I always have an anchor back there. So like if I do light server, cool. Where's Justin's weird bagel? There it is. Cool. I can still get back to Justin's weird bagel. It's just a URL. You can bookmark it. You can send it to your buddies, all that sort of stuff. Other questions about this?
So those backticks and the fetch allow you to do the interpolation?
Correct.
What's the difference between using that interpolation like bagel ID versus like colon bagel ID?
Colon bagel ID would be Ruby.
Fucker.
Accurate. The other way we could do this, which I don't recommend, is we can make those like that. And then do this. That's for squares. That's how we used to do stuff. We got a better way now. And that better way is string interpolation. Ask me more questions about this. Cool, last thing, your turn. Oh no, it's gone. So I want you to update your code to pull the thing out of the URL, make sure it works, slack it over to me when you're done. Go. If you've got the syntax, didn't write it down, look it up on MDN, just like I did. Another 30 seconds. All right, pencils down, slack me what you got. All right, excellent. So our objectives for this lesson were to identify the parts of a URL and retrieve query params from a URL with JavaScript. I'm going to call both of those a raging success. Any last questions before we break? Bon suerte, amigos.